My name is Amanda Raynor. I am the co-owner with my husband, Dr. Chris Raynor, of Human 2.0, which is an integrated healthcare facility and online business. So my background includes being a teacher, being a fitness professional for many years. I also studied architecture for a few years. The perspective that I'm sort of coming from is one of home and fitness and what it means to be healthy in terms of the spaces that we live in. This channel, Human 2.0 Home, is all about cultivating health and wellness, figuring out how to live in the healthiest way possible within the confines of the spaces that we inhabit and the practices that we engage in and the people that we surround ourselves with. I think given my educational background, combined with the fact that I, am a mother of 3 children and I stayed home with those children for the most part as a homemaker for so many years, I feel like I intimately know how to create a loving environment for my family, for people who come over, and I know how spaces affect mood. I know, the things that we need in a home, the physical spaces that we live in, to reflect how we can emotionally and mentally and socially live better in those spaces. I feel like it's almost reclaiming the role of homemaker into something that is vital for the well-being of people, family, children, all of that. It's an important job, but I think that our spaces and the way we see that job need to change in order to reflect a healthier community and healthier families. So I would say that there are a few things that are integral to cultivating or creating a healthy home. None of them are more important than the other, but they all need to sort of work together. So the space itself, the physical space of home, has an effect on people, the materials that it's made out of, how the spaces are set up to sort of invite people to come together or provide privacy for people, the size of the spaces, how light comes into the spaces. They affect how people live, how they feel, how they interact, all those things. A few other things that are sort of external to the actual physical space of the home, things that we can include in our homes to help live a healthier life. Art, I think, is really important. Music, nature, and how we are connected to nature. I think it's really important to sort of include nature into our home in different ways. Can be gardens that you have outside of your home. Again, how you access the outdoors from your space. Do you have things inside your home that reflect the outside? Things like that. And then I think just in terms of fitness, how we live an active life in our home. How does our home invite us to be active on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis? I think that there are ways of making it easier for us to be active in our homes. And I think that that's not something that we think about too much, but I think it's really important. I think if you're thinking about space in terms of what you need and what you don't need, it's a lot easier to do that if you've lived with not much and then had lots, because you can see what you lived with before and what you may have been given and what you may have lived with after that, and compare the two spaces. So for example, my family and I have lived in a small townhouse for many years together as a growing family. And then as we, developed our careers and stuff over time, we got houses that were bigger and had more space and, seemingly had the dream that everybody wants to have. But in living in those spaces, I can see things that were really necessary to have and that what were an actual waste of space and materials and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of developing future spaces, which is what I'm really interested in doing. Wasted space, I think that is something that is very problematic in how we build these days. I think most houses have spaces in them that are never used, basements, formal living rooms, things like that, that are just unnecessary spaces. The other thing I think is that we don't make use of multifunctional spaces enough. I think we can design a home to operate, like one space in that home can operate in lots of different ways. I think we're definitely getting better in those terms, in like people building tiny homes and combining use of those smaller spaces, which I think is great that we're doing that. I'm not the biggest fan of tiny homes necessarily. I think we've kind of swung the pendulum way back the other direction, from McMansions to now everybody wants to live in like 600 square feet. I don't think that that's completely necessary. I do, however, think we need to be more mindful about how we build and, how we can make spaces that serve more than one purpose. I think that that is really important in the development of architecture. It's all about being creative with how you think and also in how you live, how you actually use the space. But there's lots of ways of doing that so that you can still provide people with space to be together, so communal spaces, and then also offering sort of private spaces in the home. We all need to have time where we are with our families and with our friends and then, by ourselves. There's just ways of thinking about those things in different terms and then creating spaces to reflect those needs. So if you think about the spaces in your home in terms of sort of individual space and communal space, your home really ends up being set up to provide function for the things that you do, either alone or together in groups. So for example, in our house, some of us work from home. So we have sit-stand desks that we've set up at our back window so that we can actually look out on the yard and it's pleasant view and we can work there and it's, an enjoyable experience. And that is sort of how our space is dictated by our individual needs and practices. In terms of communal spaces, then you think, okay, well, how do we operate as a group? And how does our space and the setup of that space reflect what we do? So in our family, almost everyone here likes to make music together. So all of my children are musicians. So if you look down in the basement, it's one giant studio and they all work in that space. And that's just how we have it set up for ourselves. And it works pretty well. But if I was going to redesign things, I might make things a little different. One thing that I think that we don't think about, and this is one of the main things that I really want to address in home design and architecture, is the physicality of people. Specifically, if we want to think about in terms of fitness, how we can use the space. Do we have open spaces so that we can move around in that space? Do we have walls that can withstand putting our hands and feet on them? Do we have things to hang from? These kinds of things. How have we set our spaces up to incorporate movement? But let's take a broader look at movement and just think about the actual function of a space. How do we live in that space? And I think this applies to fitness for sure, but it just applies to life in general, that we want to set up our spaces so that they flow easily, so that your movement through the space is as seamless and as easy as possible. It makes the most sense to you to live in that space in a healthy, productive way. And think about Feng Shui is sort of a way of optimizing that. I don't know all the details of Feng Shui, but I know that it involves sort of removing blocks of energy and actual, how you set up your couch. Which way does it face the window? Does it face the door? How is your bed set up? This kind of thing. You're trying to get from here to there and there's like a table set up in the middle that gets in the way. So all that to say, I think that there are ways of setting up your home on the inside, the actual layout of it, so the footprint of it, how the rooms are placed, and then the actual furniture and windows and all of that kind of stuff, so that you can do what you want to do in the most natural way possible. If you're able to do that, it just makes your life easier. And if your life is easier, you're going to be happier with just how you live. So I think that you can think about your house in those terms. Having the opposite can make you really realize how some spaces might not work for you, but you can optimize your space so that it works in the best way possible. In terms of flow, I think it's about making the healthy choice as easy and as readily available as you possibly can. So I think when you're designing a space, it's obviously important to think about the materials that you're using. More and more important these days to choose sustainable materials, so things that you can get on the property you're building, or things that are locally sourced, or things that are abundantly sourced. Stuff like that actually matters these days. You can't just build it out of gold and use up all the gold and then there's nothing left for anybody else. So really thinking about what you're actually building with is important. I think it's also important to build to withstand activity. My house, for one, and most houses are not built with the kind of physical activity that we need to partake in. Our homes are not made to withstand that. So, we have drywall that gets dinged and dirty and can't touch it, and it's a problem, and you can't really be active, and not that you're going to be whipping things at the wall or anything like that necessarily, but I just think we live in these homes that are like model homes, and they're pretty to look at, but you can't actually do anything in them. So I think it's really important to have homes that can withstand the activity of the inhabitants and more physical activity than what we normally do, because as humans we actually need to be more active. That sort of goes back to the building something that can facilitate your life in the easiest way possible. So if you make a home that can withstand activity, you're more likely to do the activity in it, and then it just kind of goes back and forth like that. Building with materials that are as natural as possible, as chemical free as possible, that are just more healthy for your body. So even something like the paint that you put on your wall, or the material that you put on your floor, or the material that are on your couch cushions, things like that, you want them to just be as natural as possible so that you have less things that are bad for you that are surrounding you that might affect your health. You want to be able to be comfortable in your home, so you have to set it up and build it so that you feel safe in that space, that you are physically safe in that space. And I think that there's lots of ways of doing that now that make sense over maybe ways that we've done it in the past. You definitely want to prioritize health over appearance in terms of your space. Sure, you can have a space that looks good, but if it's not a healthy, safe place for you to live in, then it's not doing you any good. Which sort of leads me to thinking about redefining the looks of a home. What is on the cover of House and Home magazine, what that looks like versus what the home that facilitates physical fitness, art, music, all of that stuff, what it actually looks like. I don't think that those two things are the same thing. Figuring out what makes you happy as a human being, doing the things that make you feel good, will then just create a space that looks good. I don't think the looking good starts and that you jump into that space and you feel good in it. I think you feel good first, and then the space that you create just looks good as a byproduct of that. So beyond, the actual physical space of the home, I think that incorporating things like art, having spaces that allow people to be creative in those ways, makes sense. So maybe it's having a dedicated space where people could do fine art, where they aren't afraid to get the table dirty, or they have a setup where there's lots of pencils and markers and paintbrushes and that kind of stuff. Being creative is something that is sort of intuitive to humans, and creating spaces where we can create different kinds of art, where we feel inspired to create anything, whether it's paint or make music or draw, just to express ourselves in the spaces that we live in, instead of creating like a museum type space that you can't do anything in, is really important in how we set up our homes today and of the future. I think it's important that we are able to express ourselves creatively. I think that sometimes we don't have any other way of getting out emotions, whether they're positive or negative or whatever, to channel how we feel in a constructive way. I think that art is an important way for humans to communicate with each other, and I think we need to make it as easy as possible to do in the spaces that we live in. I want to touch a little bit on how humans are connected to nature and how that affects or dictates how we create a home that feels good to live in as much as we want to feel safe and secure in the homes that we live in, I think we also don't want to feel trapped in those homes. And I think having ways of seeing outside, so the windows that we have, how big are they? Where are they set up? What do they look out onto? The doors that we have, how are they set up? How big are they? How do we access the outdoors? Those are very important considerations to make in designing the homes that we live in. Just something as simple as we know that if we live in an apartment building, having a balcony is a valuable part of living in that apartment. Why? Because it allows us to step outside of our interior space and experience the outside. Having a deck, having a yard, having space to move from the inside to the outside, to be around plants and just to breathe in fresh air, to see green, all of those things. It just makes you feel good. It brings peace to you. And if you can't bring yourself from inside to outside in the spaces that you live, well, how can you bring the outside in? How can you bring plants into your home? Maybe you have a setup for a planter box. Maybe you have hooks to hang plants from. Just little things that you can create in your space that actually make you feel like you're part of nature. Because I think that that is an important part of being happy in the spaces that you live in. I think when you have a space that you feel safe and secure in, but that also affords you the freedom to go out of that space. If you choose to stay in the space, you choose to come back to that space every day, that is you making the choice to stay connected to that space and the people in it, which makes it not just a house, but transforms it into an actual home. I want to talk briefly about the importance of light in the homes that we create. I think currently we just make houses, we put windows in those houses. Maybe there's one window in each room. Probably don't think about it more than that. But I think it's really important to think about how much light we let into certain rooms and certain spaces. Some places we want to be darker, to be quieter, to be more meditative. Other spaces we want to allow the light to come in as much as possible. We want to capture the light as it travels across the sky in certain directions. So I think in houses that are actually designed by architects, not just put up in a builder's subdivision or something like that, they actually take light into account more, because all of those things, whether it's light or dark or where the windows sit in a room, the size of the windows, all those things can affect how you feel inside those spaces. And your biology responds to that light. You know, you wake up at a certain time of day, you want to sleep at a certain time of day, and those things are very important to our health. So creating spaces that naturally harness the power of light or shut it out in spaces we need it to is an important consideration. It's just another way for us to really connect with nature. I think a healthy home is really a balance of two things. It's a space that provides comfort and safety and togetherness with family and friends and stuff like that, but it's also a place that promotes and really fosters growth, whether that is spiritual growth, mental growth, physical growth, in doing different activities with different people, that it allows you to move and be creative and to just think outside the box. Your home being sort of the stage for your life, where you're going to live your life in the best way that you can.